Fanless, thank you so much for making it onto Podcast Junkies.
Oh man, thanks for having me here.
So I love these conversations because they're a way for me to just kind of have a re-engagement with folks that I've connected with in the conferences, and everything goes by so quickly at those conferences. And I know that's sort of like how we started to become friends and meet. And unfortunately, we don't get enough time to go deep diving on learning and, a little bit more about you. And, I know we had some good chats in the past, but I thought it'd be nice to kind of share your story about, how you ended up in the world of podcasting and a little bit about your background. So we'll start there. I know that you've got a background like me. I saw that you had some experience with Citibank, and I actually started out in banking. I was started out as a teller, like way back. I'm dating myself, but this is way back in like my mid 20s. But I'm curious about your journey, like how as you started working full time, and I know you've got some experience in some UX stuff, like what your thoughts were about like where you wanted to focus time and what type of businesses or what type of work you were looking to get into.
Sure. So, as you alluded, I had a colorful history, a colorful past, and now I'm a founder of a tech company, and I've been in tech for a long time. I guess over, yeah, not to date myself. I hate these date myself type questions, but yeah, over 15 years in tech, probably over 20, quite honestly. But yeah, I've been in tech for a long time, and yeah, most recently founder of Fanlist, which kind of brought me into the world of podcasting and the conference that you alluded to. So happy to talk about that. But yeah, I feel like I've had many lives over the course of the career. And one life was in banking. I was in mortgages, learned a lot about that. Actually, even tried to start a startup around real estate before. So that's kind of what I usually do. Take something I know, something I'm a little bit passionate about, and try to do something entrepreneurial about it. But yeah, worked for Citibank for a while as a account executive and
It's interesting because I looked at the timeline, and I think you left around 2008, which is obviously a big time in the mortgage world. And I was working at E-Trade at the time, and it was wild because I remember my boss. He was the head of FP&A, like finance. He was having twice daily calls with the finance team because people were like withdrawing money at an alarming rate from their accounts. And it was a pretty crazy time. Like there was a couple of weeks when we didn't know if we were going to go out of business or like we were going to have jobs. So you caught the tail end of that, but it's crazy to have been through a crisis like that, and also to see how much rippling effects it had for people who like were not prepared, or just people who were just getting into the wrong kinds of investments. So it was a pretty wild ride. I remember that at the time, for sure.
yeah, totally, and you hit the nail on the head, 2008, so I caught the tail end of it, also the sweet end of it too. It was, like, such a crazy time. It was my sister, she worked at Citibank, she's like, "Hey, Pat," I was kinda going through a life transition, she's like, "Hey, you should try mortgage for a little bit. It's just, like, things are just blowing up, and we need people, and I think you'd enjoy this." So I was like, "Oh," I was at a point in my life where I was like, "Oh, I'll give it anything a try," so yeah, went into that and, yeah, and I quit because of the meltdown in 2008. They shut down our whole, we sold home equities, which has nothing to do about podcasting, but interesting time. If it wasn't for that meltdown, I'd probably still be doing mortgage because it's a pretty fun industry too.
Which is, you got into UX. Did you have a design background?
Yeah, so I had been doing no, I don't have a design background. I actually went to college for studying English literature.
Maybe we'll get into that as well.
Maybe, yeah, I feel like in the past we talked about writing. Yeah, so, I mean, being an English lit, you kinda have to be pretty agile. You have to adapt because there's not much you could do unless you wanna be a writer, a lawyer, or maybe a teacher, and that's out of college, I actually wanted to be a teacher. I love teaching, wanted to be a high school teacher, but, I went down the road of, and sorry if this is, you know
No, this is great because I think what's interesting is like the reason I love these conversations is because just all the different ways people arrive into the world of podcasting, and we all have I mean, I got into podcasting because of DJing. Like I grew up as a house music DJ, and I had a mobile app I was working on, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go to a podcast conference and start a podcast to interview DJs. And I went to New Media Expo in Las Vegas in 2014, and quickly changed gears. Pat Flynn was there and Amy Porterfield, and I was like, probably be easier to interview podcasters than DJs. So let me do that. But I called it. Someone mentioned like Podcast Junkies, and I was like, oh yeah, cool. That's a cool name. So I grabbed a domain, and quickly shifted gears, but I mean, that passion remains for like house music. But that's literally like I would say like house music and DJing got me into podcasting.
Yeah. And I mean, quite honestly, that's why I love podcasts. I love, we could talk about this, how I stumbled on the fan list and stuff, but I just love the people that I meet in podcasting because they come in from such diverse backgrounds. And I have a pretty diverse one. And yeah, I mean, just to close out that story of English lit and teaching, I student taught while I did my studies at Berkeley. I went to UC Berkeley and I student taught at a inner city school. And I was just like, wow, this is one of the hardest jobs ever.
Just like in the movies, right?
Like, there's just no appreciation. Yeah, it's hard, and teachers get jaded, and I worked for this, really sort of jaded type teacher, and I'm like, "You know what?" She probably started, off as this kind of, bright-eyed person like me too, and eventually I'm gonna get jaded, so maybe I'll do this kind of later in life. So that kinda brought me to all these different things.
And so how'd you get into UX design?
So UX design, it was, yeah, kind of that transition from, what do I do now? So I really out of college, I went to entertainment because I lived in LA. It's kind of one of the things you do. So I kind of worked in the TV and all this stuff I leave out of LinkedIn, by the way. It's like the stuff that you don't want to talk.
No, that's the stuff that like when you're like late night or you're at the bar and you're just like, okay, let's talk about all the interesting journey.
All the odd jobs. Exactly. So I had a lot of odd jobs. I was like a TV writer for a while in Hong Kong and all this stuff. And somehow I got a job in tech. I think it was just because, the first dot com and second dot com, yeah, tech blew up. So got a job in there. And the thing I gravitated towards most was designing how a product worked. So that got me into, even before they called it UX, it was information architecture. Fell in love with that and just started doing UX, and UX eventually led me into doing this thing called product management, and now I do a lot of product management and product design, which usually kinda lends itself to being kinda like that founder role. Yeah, so it kinda took me deep into tech, I guess, really quickly.
So then you sort of began to have like a this love affair for tech and this love affair for creating your own products or creating your own businesses. When did you start to realize that you were leaning towards becoming an entrepreneur?
I mean, really early on, just like a lot of people, I had imposter syndrome for what I was doing. So I just started consuming a ton of books, and a lot of the tech books were around entrepreneurship, and a lot of the stuff people I was following were tech entrepreneurs, and so it just kinda quickly seeps into your DNA. You read about all these tech journeys, and it's like, "Yeah, I could be an individual contributor. Sure, that's gonna be good for a while," but I started gravitating towards the stories of people who are founding companies, like, have an idea, and it was, kinda played along with my strength too of, like, designing products that kind of solve problems, and yeah, just kind of fell in love with it through a lot of reading and through a lot of experience, and quite honestly, like, sometimes through being a little bit frustrated with some of the companies I worked with. It's like, I think there's a better way to do this. And yeah, it maybe the ego got the best of me, really.
So, having had that interest in startups, you had a couple of experiences before Fanlist. So, without going into, the nitty-gritty details, but what was that experience like, founding your own products and your own companies?
Sure. I mean, the sort of the successful, I founded a lot of ones that I'd rather not talk about. They didn't really go anywhere, but yeah, the sort of last successful one was in healthcare, and it's because I met my founder at a previous job that I had, building up a influencer network. And not to get too deep into the story, but my co-founder was a medical doctor. He just, became a plastic surgeon, just went through residency, and then he started this other company where I worked with him at. He sold that company, and when he went to go do his next company, he wanted to tackle something in the medical field. And he's like, "You want to, I had a great working relationship with him already for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and he was like, "Yeah, you want to start the next company?" And that company was, we did something, you know, pretty in the weeds around medical credentialing, which is something I'm totally not interested in, but I was interested in entrepreneurship. I'm just interested in solving problems with tech. So I said yes. But I mean, the relevant part of that story was, I realized, how important it is to work on something you're passionate about. And although I was passionate about solving problems with tech, I wasn't really passionate about that problem space. Like, that was definitely more of a story for my co-founder who, was a doctor, I kinda dealt with that kind of problem before, and I'm like, "I have no idea what that problem is, happy to dive into it." So I dove into that for 6 years. So we ran that company for 6 years, we grew it to, yeah, a long time. I think we got up to, I don't know, 60 to 80 employees, and it got acquired, and yeah, and then so when I thought of what we're gonna do next, I just thought, let's kind of, yeah, go towards something I'm a little bit more passionate about, something I could wake up every day and think, "Yeah, let's solve this problem," and be pretty happy trying to solve it. Yeah, so that's how I got into podcasting.
How did you get into like, what was your awareness of, like, the podcasting landscape? Were you coming at it from a consumer perspective, like, were the shows you were listening to, or did you jump straight into, like, figuring out, where you could, you know, add some value from a business perspective?
Yeah, good question. It was really definitely from a listener or a fan's perspective. That's why, it's called Fanlist today. It's like kind of where it comes from. It's like that's how, I wanted to interact with, podcasts from like quite honestly like a super fan perspective. I wanted to participate, and so I didn't really know the pain points coming into it from a podcaster's perspective. I've always wanted to start a podcast before that company, but I just did not come from that perspective, so I had to learn all these things. I think that's how we met. So my first foray really into, the podcast community, the podcaster community, not the listener community, was, yeah, going to podcast movement. That's where we launched, oddly. I probably broke a lot of startup rules of, like, not doing homework before.
Just show up, yeah.
Yeah, I should have showed up first and kinda learned a lot more, but, I think at that time I had some podcaster friends already, kinda picked their brains and kinda just kinda studied, I guess, from an arm's length, how they worked, and yeah, just pick some pain point to solve.
So talk about a little bit about the thought process or origin story for, like, Fanless, and, how did you go about figuring out, what the pain point was that you're trying to solve, and maybe talk a little bit about any research you've done beforehand? Because, I imagine, a lot of podcasters are also entrepreneurs, and, I myself have a graveyard of, shuttered business ideas. I think I did a post, last year, a couple of years ago, about, all the dot coms that I had registered in the hopes of, like, great businesses, and it started way back, I think, in 2000, like, probably 11 or 12. I was just random ideas, but it's so funny because when you look at the registrar and you're just like, "Oh, yeah, I did that. I tried that." So I'm curious, how you think about it, your thought process about, like, deciding, like, this is what you wanna spend some time on.
Sure, by the way, I have that same graveyard. It's funny, I look at it every what is it? Every year we have to renew. And I'm like, "Should I keep this or not?" And it's like, "Yeah, let's keep it." It's kind of funny, nostalgic reminder of, how you thought
I feel like every entrepreneur needs to do, like, a Marie Kondo of their, like, domains and just kinda just, like, hug it, and then just let it go and just be like, "This was fun. Nice ride," like, kinda like you do with your closet of clothes and stuff like that.
Well, it doesn't take up much space, so I say keep it. Keep it for the memories. But yeah, the journey was really, I was listening to podcasts, some of my favorite podcasts at the time, and, one of the things that made me fall in love with podcasts is like, oh, I feel like me as a listener, developed a relationship with these people, even though it's a total, what do they call it? A parasocial relationship where I have no idea who I am, but I noticed some of my favorite podcasters were doing the thing where, they take listener call-ins and, they're talking to the listener. One of the earliest podcasts I listened to was This Week in Tech by Leo Laporte, one of the pioneers. And yeah, I was like, I remember thinking, and at that time, I don't think I had a lot of money, but he did this thing where he was building a new studio and he was selling bricks. I don't know if you know about this, but he was building, he was selling bricks that he was literally going to put into the new studio. So you could have your name on a brick. And even me not having a lot of money, I was like, oh, this is so brilliant. It's like, I want to be part of this. I wanted to support him in buying a brick. To my shame, I didn't. I should have,
Does he still have that studio?
but I'm not sure. He's moved a couple times. I mean, he's just gotten big over the years, and I think he was doing the bricks, pretty early on, and I just thought, "Wow, this is so cool." So, that's really sort of the pattern I started seeing. It's like you feel close to these shows because they need you to survive, and you could take part in their survival and in their success, and I just kinda love that sort of give and get type thing, and
I know that you can relate to this because my marketing brain never shuts off. So, like, you start talking, and I'm like thinking about ideas, and I'm like, you could create a background of that's kind of like simulates like bricks, and it could be in a way where it's interactive, where you could change the name, so each name would have, like, to your point, like, you could have it but it's almost like a panel, so it's a done for you kit for podcasters to put as their backgrounds, and if they wanted to, they could sell the panels, there, because I could just see that, like, having, like, my brand colors, like Podcast Junkies yellow as my background, and then you could kinda see, like, in a brick format. It's almost like a faux brick wall, but then each of the ones would have like the names of them or something like that. So it's like that totally could be something that I think podcasters would love because it's like a monetization and it builds in their fan base, which I thought that's pretty genius.
yeah. Which made me think it's like, a lot of podcasters don't know that they could change their cover art on every episode. So why not sponsor that cover art? That's kinda neat. I don't see any podcasters actually changing up their per episode cover art too much.
You actually the cover art for this show. That's interesting. Yeah.
Oh, that too, yeah, that'd be neat. That's how it got kind of maybe the, original idea germinated. So, just to tell you a little bit about sort of the origin story, it didn't start out as Fanlist. A lot of the old timers, remember it as PodInbox. We actually just did a rebrand, earlier this year, so Fanlist is kinda new. We kinda relaunched with a ton of new features, a lot of which a lot of people still don't know about. So, and the idea was very simple. It was started as PodInbox. It was sort of an inbox for podcasters to receive audio messages, so that they could, do the segment where, someone leaves you an audio message, for whatever reason. It could be a question or whatever, or a story, and then you play it back on the show. And those are the shows that I kind of tended to gravitate, the ones that kind of included the audience. I thought they were really smart. So I thought, yeah, why not just build a solution for that? So, and which is still one of our core products, is sort of this fan mail inbox type solution. And yeah, that's kind of how it started. And, we just kept on building.
So do you have a co-founder?
No, I don't. I have our sort of CTO is this guy I've worked with for, I'd say, about 8 years, with other startups. So he's basically like a co-founder, but, for right now, we're, bootstrapped, which is this journey that I sort of was very curious about. My last company was venture backed. We raised a lot of millions of dollars, and I was like, "Oh, let's try to bootstrap it this time." I had a windfall from the acquisition. I thought, maybe I could fund this myself in the beginning, and yeah, right now. So I don't know if you know much about bootstrap startups. Sometimes it's just easier to not have a co-founder. You can move a little bit faster, and yeah, that's kinda what we opted for, is like, "Yeah, let's move a little bit faster," and
So for
uh
folks that are not familiar with Fanlist, how would you describe the service?
yeah, good question. I would say it's a fan engagement platform where you could create a fan page, invite your fans to come participate, where you can connect with them, and then eventually you can monetize from them. So probably the best analogy is a little bit like bundling a bunch of solutions that podcasters already use, like a Patreon and a Buy Me a Coffee and like a Shopify. So it has all these kind of features, and we kind of bundle it all in one fan page. So kind of making it simple, sort of not just for the podcaster, but also for the fan who, maybe they'll just like come take a free action. Like maybe they want to leave, you, Harry, they've been listening to you for years, and you have a Q&A segment, and they wanna ask you a question, so they could do that. And then as they kinda look at your fan page, they might see you have other offerings too, maybe, giving you a tip or buying something from your shop. Yeah. I don't know if that was succinct, but
Gotta work on that elevator pitch, right?
yeah, I know.
No, it's interesting because it's always a challenge, right? Like, you think about and I think about it from, the agency perspective, right? Like, I literally just was rewriting my one-liner because I was, realizing I was working with a coach in terms of branding, and it's like I'm working on my LinkedIn profile and, best practice is, like, when people go to your LinkedIn or your Twitter or your Instagram or your YouTube, like, it should be the kinda like the same header, same tagline, so there's, like, a consistent look and feel, and I've landed on, like, I think it's along the lines of, like, I help heart-led entrepreneurs amplify their authority with our done for you podcast services, just that's like a one liner, but it's helpful because, it's that I help blank with, blank, so it's kind of like, I help podcasters monetize, or we help podcasters monetize, and engage with their, most diehard fans or something like that, through a one-stop shop platform or something like that. So
Yeah, I like that. You said that better than me. I like that. I'm gonna have to steal that. I'm gonna
having had, you started as PodInbox, rebranded to Fanlist. Describe that, that journey so far. Like, what's it been like, and what have you learned along the way, and what's been like the response from folks that have engaged with the tool?
The response has been great. Like, people are seeing, I think, like, for the first not for the first time. So, when we rebranded, we had to develop a bunch of new features because we were going from PodInbox, where we were just an inbox, to kind of the suite, a bundled suite of tools. So, to make that statement true, that, like, now, we're a place to help grow your fan lists, that's kind of part of our title. We wanted to offer a suite of tools, and we still have a lot of tools that we're still working on. So it was kind of a long journey to get users to see that aha moment where, oh, I see what you're trying to do now. You're trying to make my life easier for me, so I don't have to go, you know, use all these other tools and send my audience to all these other places. So, yeah, the feedback recently has been good as people are seeing our suite of tools mature. So, like right now, we're doing V2s on all our tools. So, for example, I do demos every day. And one of the things we demo is our chat. We have like this group chat. So, a lot of times it's like, oh, I want to meet other Harry's fans, from one of your podcasts, maybe vertical farming. By the way, I talk about your vertical farming podcast all the time.
Thank you.
I'm like, super fan of this thing that you've done. And, sometimes you wanna send people somewhere so that they could connect.
So
And
when you say they connect, do you mean like fellow super fans like connect with each other?
yeah, so that they could chat, right? So and, some might say this is a solved problem with Slack or Discord, but if you think about that's kind of a heavy lift for the busy podcaster, right? To set up a Slack or Discord room. So we just wanted to have it turnkey. So we created V1 of chat. And every demo, what I was getting at is I say, don't use this V1 chat yet. It's just not quite there. So right now we've done we've done a V2 of almost all our core features and like except, one or two, Slack being one of them, or I'm sorry, chat being one of them. So yeah, so as we're getting V2 all polished up, it's really kind of becoming where people are like, "Oh, this is better than," often we're compared to Patreon. A lot of times people are like, "How are you different from Patreon?" And I'm always like, "Well,
Yeah, that's got to be the main question, right?
yeah." And I have a good hack. I was just gonna post a post on LinkedIn today. I have it kind of queued up and ready to go. But, what I like to say is like when someone says, "Go visit my Patreon," what's the first thing that comes in your mind?
I don't know. I think it's just the extra work to kind of like figure that out and sign up for Patreon. And yeah, I haven't been on anyone's Patreon in a while. Like, I had signed up for a couple in the beginning, so it's kind of like an ecosystem I haven't been like engaged with in a while.
See, I mean, that's a good point too. That's a good response. So when a creator tells you, go visit my Patreon, it's usually it's a call to spend money, right? It's a transaction.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Usually a lot of people are saying like, go subscribe to some premium content. And although we believe in subscription, we have that feature too. We more believe in this fan journey that it's not always transactional, right? The funnel maybe starts off with some free actions and then it might lead to some paid actions like subscribing, buying something, giving a tip or whatever. So we kind of really want to brand ourselves of like, hey, that create a connection first, create a deeper connection. Then they'll kind of see these other things that you offer, and then they might partake in these like monetization ones to further support your show. It's like if Leo Laporta, if I heard his podcast and the first thing he did was like, "Hey, come buy a brick," I would be like, I have no idea what you're talking. I don't know who you are. Let's develop a rapport first. So that's what we want to be known for. And it's funny the thing I said. The thing you said about getting your elevator pitch, and I'm horrible at it. I'm horrible at telling our story sometimes. And so I went to AI and I said, how is Fanlist? This is what I was going to write on LinkedIn. The prompt is, how is Fanlist better than Patreon? And they wrote such a beautiful description. I'm like, "Oh, they nailed it." First of all, I'm glad, they know, they're pretty smart system, I guess. And yeah, they wrote really good rundown that, I encourage you, if you're curious why how we're different, to type it in yourself because 'cause they're gonna say it better than me.
Well, it's just so interesting because I this is another sidebar, but, like, I think learning how to engage with these new chat tools and, my focus has been ChatGPT because it's just the easiest. They were first out at the gate, and so it's like I know there's others like Claude and, Midjourney and all that stuff for images and stuff, but it really it's almost like, if I think about how much money I would have to have spent for like a copywriter, a proofreader, a research assistant, like sometimes there's just top of mind stuff like, like I need some, you know, questions on like buyer personas or ideal customer profiles. And then I'm like, and I need to just brainstorm ideas. And the fact that you can just iterate so fast, it really feel and as much as people are, like, stressed about, like, all the jobs that are gonna go away, I mean, but I think you can't, like, deny that, and you have to, like, learn this ability. What I like to say is, like, we have to learn how to, like, speak with the robots. Like, we have to learn their language, and we have to learn how to, like, build a relationship with them, so because not that they're gonna become our overlords, but it's interesting and fun fact, I always, like, say "please" in my prompts too, just in case, you never know. Just in case remember me, like, I'm the nice human. But it is interesting because I was just using it today because 'cause I'm doing some, like, rethinking how I wanna do my content marketing strategy, and, you have to think about it from, like, the different phases of where customers are, like, solution aware, problem aware, and all the basics, and you have to write copy specific to them in that area, and then what are the pain points and problems, and I've been uploading, like, all our services, what we do. I've uploaded, like, my 10-part email sequence. And it starts to understand because now it can understand like prompts across different channels within ChatGPT, right? So over time it starts to know like this is how I speak, this is my audience, these are my offerings. And I think to the extent that we just get better and better at this, it helps us as entrepreneurs like get our message out there so you can start to find the people that are looking for this type of service. I've used other tools similar to it and helps you like articulate clearly like the offering and how it benefits them.
Yeah, one of the best pieces of advice that I got that kinda changed the way I use, and I'm like you, I use ChatGPT. I mean, I do comparisons all the time, like, with, pretty much with ChatGPT, Gemini, and Perplexity. That's the one I kinda go back and forth on. And, yeah, Chat is still it's, like, just so thorough. I don't know if it's just because 'cause they've been around longer or it's their thought process, but one of the best pieces of advice I got that find has really changed my relationship with these tools is like, the advice is like, if use AI for things that are your weakness, and for your superpower, then, don't rely on them so much. And that was just an easy frame to think about it. So like I said, like I know I'm like a little bit sometimes I'm a little too wordy. I'm not that concise. So I'm like, I know that's my weakness. So, let's see, how does ChatGPT say it? They're probably going to say it better than me.
And you do have to be well, the key is to really feed it examples of how you talk, your style, because obviously those first couple of prompts in the beginning, they're just going to sound like a robotic chat GPT prompt, right? And they're using words that like you would never use. But I think the key is to really feed it, feed the algorithm and just say, hey, this is how I speak. That a little bit of like funny or witty or whatever, like to throw an occasional pun in there or something like that. So it starts to sound a little bit natural. But I'm glad to see you're getting some good results with it. So what do you think has been the biggest challenge in terms of like getting people aware of the tool and maybe understanding that this is something they need? Because the best part about it is that there's no fee to sign up. Like, and I think that's like the strangest thing for people. Like when they come, they immediately go to like service forward slash pricing. Like, how much is it going to be? Like, I do this all the time, and you just charge. You collect a fee based on whatever the podcaster themselves generates in terms of revenue.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you're a sophisticated buyer then if you go straight to slash pricing. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It is very challenging in the world that I play in. It's called product marketing. And as a smaller company, I do all the product marketing in terms of sending out the emails and making sure people really know. So we have like a lot of like little widgets on our site that kind of tell you all the new features, but it's still, one of the things I battle with personally is I hate spam. And being like sort of a spam hater, I tend to not send a lot of product updates but other products that you do sign up with, they're sending you updates almost twice a week, 3 times a week. So we probably have to do better at that, sending more updates, getting people.
But I think it's an important distinction because yeah, it's all really like your perspective and how you look at things as well. Because spam is like, I will promote your podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, all, broken English, like not a clear full statement, clearly like, getting like number one iTunes promoter, like podcast, Spotify ranking service, like immediate spam, right? You see those come across or you see those LinkedIn connection requests. But as an entrepreneur myself, like I'm always thinking about I have to learn new tools and new skill sets like sales, lead gen, like how do I generate new business? And as much as like we've built up a goodwill through a referrals basis, like if I want to stay, current and active and continue to grow the pipeline, I've recently learned like cold email, like, and just worked with a company that does cold email strategy, and there's a process for doing that. And I've sort of, looked at it from a different perspective because, I've responded to the occasional cold email because they've targeted me in the just right time when I had a specific need for that service. I'm like, oh, like some sort of like video editing, like promotion tool or something like that. I was like, actually, like I'm thinking about that, or we're looking at companies for that service. And, I've tried a couple and I think one or two I've ended up like working with them. So it kind of worked. But again, the return on those is really, really low. I think it's like if you get a 0.02 return on cold email, like you're doing well, right? But when I look at it, we're doing some for our agency right now. And so, I just need maybe like 10 or 20 positive responses. And if one or two of those close a month, the service is more than paid for itself, right? And I did get someone who just replied, "Hey, Harry, I was just like, literally, like, you got me at the right time. I'm looking to start a podcast." And he was like the ideal customer, for me. And we're having that conversation now, and hopefully it'll close, knock on wood, and he'll close as a client. But I think it's the way I see it. And I think about this from how we create podcasts for people, but also as an entrepreneur, like if you have a service that you feel is beneficial to your target audience, it's almost like your mandate or, it's your responsibility to just do whatever you can. If you feel like you're clearly solving a pain point for people, like, the onus is on you to like do whatever you can as a business owner to get in front of figure out all the different ways to get in front of your audience because like, hey, I'm like, so I feel good about like what I do because it's like, okay, some people are just like unsubscribe, unsubscribe. And I'm always super polite. I'm just like, hey, Pat, sorry, this wasn't a fit for you. I'm unsubscribing you right now. And I reply to each one of those, because I'm just like, hey, there's a human being here. Like, I'm just trying stuff out. So, obviously you'll always get a small percentage of people who just like want to burn your inbox or just like, blast you for like being the most horrible person in the world. But I just wanted to provide some context about that because you did mention spam. And if people are signing up for the service as Fanlist, like they give me an update, like they've self-selected, to get the emails, which is different too.
Yeah, I agree. Well, first, I got to say thanks for your TED talk. I appreciate it. And for your listeners, definitely listen to Harry. But I'll tell you my weaknesses is so yeah, definitely one of my weaknesses is marketing. Marketing, I'll actually tell you even a funny story that kind of relates to you. Is there's this one podcast movement. I can't remember if it was Podfest or Podcast Movement, one of these big podcast conferences where we were on stage at the same time on a different stage, and I remember I heard you were giving a talk that I heard before. It was your vertical farming talk. And I was like, "Oh," and there were friends that I'm like, "Oh, I think they need to listen to that talk." So I was like driving. I drove at least 5 people that were like, "Hey, they wanted to come to my talk." I was like, "No, go listen to Harry's talk. You already know about Fanless. You don't have to know any more about it. Like, don't come to my talk. Go to Harry's talk." And, that's just kind of a little bit how I'm built. And I think it came from this place where, I study a lot of businesses, and there's this business called Five Guys. It's like this burger restaurant, right? Yeah, pretty popular burger place. And their origin story was, they just wanted to make the best burger. And they broke like this cardinal rule in retail, which is they picked a horrible location. So their thesis for that was we're gonna pick the worst location that people can't find, and if they still find us, then I think we got something here. So they picked this horrible location. They didn't do any marketing, and people were lining up the door for their burgers. And they thought, we really got something, so let's expand. So I think I have a little bit of that mentality. I don't think it's a good one. So once again, don't take my advice. It's like Harry's advice is the truth. But I think part of the thing, this philosophy that I have is like I'm just so product focused. I just want to build this product. We definitely have to do way better on marketing, like so I love your advice. It's like I think sometimes I feel like I think I'm selling too much, but I think we did build a product that does the community a good service. It's at a good price, and yeah, I should talk about it more.
The anti-marketing marketing strategy.
Yeah.
So, just being conscious of the time, we usually have a couple of questions that we ask towards the end of these conversations. What is something you've changed your mind about recently?
Something I changed my mind about. So maybe I'll kind of, for podcasting or for business.
Whatever you feel most compelled to talk about. Maybe both.
So maybe I'll share briefly on both. So for business, there's this concept of bundling and unbundling. For a while, I was sort of in the unbundling camp. But when I think of Fanlist, it's like what we're really trying to do is bundle a lot of tools. So just to make life and the ease of use of a product easier for both the fan and the creator. So we really kind of double down on bundling. Like the pattern that we see is like a lot of podcasters are like reaching for, I don't know, 3 or 5 tools to do this thing that sometimes it's a hobby or sometimes it's, ancillary income. So I sort of become more of a fan of bundling, which is a little bit of a hot take. And some of the industry is kind of going towards bundling as well. So that's very entrepreneurial, geeky revelation. And I would say from a podcaster's perspective, I used to have a podcast. It was like sort of to get my reps in to, learn more about life of a podcaster. It was a podcast about podcasts that I thought was relevant to my business. Yeah, I a pod faded. I don't do it anymore. And I think what I switched my mind about is, I kind of bought in to the industry thought that, pod fade is like kind of a bad word, but I think there's seasons for everything. And maybe even the use of seasons is kind of a good word because, now when I'm thinking of launching a couple more podcasts, and I'm thinking of, okay, let's really lean into something that I think will have a little bit more resonance to me as a person. Yeah, so when I'm thinking about the new concepts, I'm kind of giving myself the latitude to be like, "Oh, it could be seasonal." Like, it doesn't have to be forever. Or if you do have one forever, it doesn't have to be weekly. Like, there could be different formats, and it's kind of up to you. So that's, yeah, something I guess, yeah, really did a 180 on.
It sounds like we'll have to have a post-interview chat because I got so many ideas. I'm like, "Oh, we gotta talk because 'cause I'm like, because you think about I definitely agree seasonal because 'cause we've done shows for clients and they've done, like I have a client that will do 12 episodes and they'll take a break for a year and then come back and they'll do, like, another 12 and they're like and then he'll come back a year later and he's like, "I wanna do a daily show, 30 episodes," and each one was, like, 5 minutes and just he's just trying different things, right? So he's in real estate, and we've even rebranded his show. It was his business is called Get Traction. It's a real estate business now. It's called the Art and Science of Real Estate Negotiation. Because I'm really big on naming shows, as you can see with vertical farming podcasts. Like call it what it does on the label. What it says on the label. It should be pretty clear. But it's interesting with your concept. There's these shows that are nurturing these super fan communities, and so you could have it rebrand as super fan stories, and figure out from your audience or from your clients like you've all got these super fans. I could probably name a couple just for podcast junkies that have been important for me, and I think about them immediately. And I know Dave Jackson, our mutual friend Dave Jackson, talks about, you know, um, he would put like this was back in the day. I don't know if he still does this, but like putting pictures of like his people that he knew were fans of the show, like on his wall. So when he would be recording his show, he'd be like staring at the picture. Oh, there's a picture of Pat, there's a picture of Harry. And so now, like, when he's recording solo content, he's thinking about those people, as his super fans, right? So it's really like interesting to tell those stories because it's one of our it's always interesting because as you think about the service and how the podcast could play into that, when people say like, "Oh, why is it important to engage with my fans?" And you could be like, "Well, that's a good question. How about you go listen to this episode and you can hear how super fans like can really like help the culture within a community and stuff like that." So that's one idea to think about. One of our clients, our past client, she did 3 seasons It's called Leadership Impact. She coaches CEOs. She just did the 3 seasons and then that was enough, but it's all evergreen content now. So when she's talking to prospects, she'll say, "Hey, Pat, it sounds like you've got some challenges in your organization with like leadership or honesty. Go back and listen to season 2, episodes 5 and 6, and then schedule a follow-up with me." And she calls those prescriptions, which I love. So it's basically like podcast prescriptions. And she's like, the podcast is doing the heavy lifting now. So you don't have to feel like you need to convince people like on a sales call or just like, oh, why should I do, what's so great about Fanlist? And be like, hey, go listen to these episodes. You can hear like people with their success stories about like how much fun they're having like using the tool. So that's just some ideas. Like I say, I think about these ideas all the time.
No, those are great ideas. Yeah, it'd be fun to riff on some.
So, what keeps you motivated? Like, this is entrepreneurship is not for everyone. The entrepreneur's journey is fraught with like tons of failure. I don't know which has more rate of failure, restaurants or entrepreneurs, but because restaurants are pretty high. But I've been thinking about this as an entrepreneur myself. Like, you have to be comfortable and embrace failure because those are all the reasons you've now determined all the reasons that don't or the things that don't work. So that gets you closer. And I think I heard someone mention this as like, if there's 10 ways that something works and you tried like and the first nine don't work, every time you'd experience that failure, like your rate of success gets higher because you're like, oh, I've eliminated one more failure, eliminated one more. Now you're getting closer and closer to that, that win or like that success. But you have to keep getting up. And I think so many times entrepreneurs, like just as they're getting close to that breakthrough, like they give up and they're like, oh, this is not for me. F this. Like I'm going back to my 9 to 5. And, I've seen that in the podcasting space, some of our peers and colleagues, end up back at their 9 to 5 jobs, with the podcasting company. So how do you, think about this from just a personal perspective? Like what keeps you going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'll have to say, so many things, but I think in general, I have like a very positive personality. And I'm kind of like cup is half full type guy. I mean, that goes a long way. It seems so obvious, but I think without that, it'd be very easy to give up. But when I just tend to spin, even failures as like a win. Like, for example, a lot of people are like, should I even try this thing? And, try building something, try doing something. I'm like, well, what's it going to cost you? Like, I don't know, a year of your life, maybe, which sounds like a lot, but and then, then you think, well, even if you fail, what's the worst case? It's like you have something tangible that you could show for it. If it's even just a story, stories are so valuable in people's lives. It's like when they go back in their life and kind of look at the chapters, there's not, a lot of unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people live chapters that aren't worth reading. There's just not a lot there, right? So I'm like, just it's kind of worth an interesting chapter here and there. So, like at the least, there's that kind of gain. So I don't know. I just personally, I'm always kind of spinning things to gain. That said, you want to be smart about it. Like to me, part of my sort of framework for when I chose to do this is like, well, what's something I could wake up every day and like be pretty excited to tackle that problem, or be pretty excited to serve that community. So, for example, like one of the businesses I did right before this, I experimented for about a year, was building something for real estate because that was kind of part of my story. I do like real estate, but we built a product for real estate agents, and not to disparage any real estate agents. Like brother-in-law is a real estate agent. I sort of dabbled in being one at some point, some chapter in my life, but I was like, oh, it. I woke up every morning thinking, I don't know. This is a community I was really meant to serve every day. I think I still love the product. I loved the problem we were trying to solve for them, but it just wasn't a fit for that community. So for me, I really took a hard look. It's like, every podcaster I met up until then, it was just like I enjoyed the conversations. I think they're doing something interesting. I think they're brave for taking a risk. And it's just I just thought if I had to serve this community for the next 10, 20 years of my life, I think I could do it. I think that's the community I wanna serve. So, I think, yeah, that's kind of being excited to wake up every day to do that. That's got me going pretty good so far. It's been 3 years.
Were you surprised by the kind of the way in which the podcasting community like kind of welcomed you, or what was your experience? Because a lot of people have that experience when they come in from under industries. They're like, everyone in podcasting is like so friendly, and like you go to these conferences and you start to meet people, and everyone's like wants to share ideas. And I'm curious what your experience was like and how it's been over the past few years, especially from attending the conferences.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it's been, yeah, very welcoming. I don't know if I had a lucky break or whatever, but I mean, my first conference, we sponsored a booth. So I don't know if that was a little bit different than other people's experience, but in general, I think it's a very open community. I tend to just personally, I think on a personal level, I just don't like industry with a lot of gatekeepers. You know, I don't know if the verdict is still out, but like I hope this doesn't become that kind of industry. I could kinda see it becoming that because it's
You can see that in the like the last podcast, couple of podcast movements. They're super corporate now.
yeah, they're getting very corporate, so and it's good. It's probably good for me that it becomes bigger but, gatekeepers are always kind of a little bit problematic, just from a philosophical point of view, from an entrepreneur standpoint. I always sort of tend to, I guess, commiserate with startups, so I'm always friendly to startups. So, I mean, couple of legends in the field right when we were starting, they welcomed me, and I was like, "Wow, this is so cool." Like, I mean, I'll even like, Evo Terra, I don't, right? I was like, "Wow, this guy's so accessible, so welcoming," and our product was really not that great at that time, probably. It's like, "Hey, you guys are doing something really interesting and really great." So, yeah, so it was very supportive. I love it, and I just hope it continues to be that way.
That's good to hear. What is the most misunderstood thing about you?
About me, I mean, I do kind of it's weird. I think you mentioned something about heartfelt entrepreneurs. Is that part of the tagline? I think I belong there, but sometimes, as an entrepreneur, you gotta get stuff done too. And there's like competition and there's all these, things kind of that you have to be responsible for. So I like to be thought of as a pretty nice guy. But every once in a while, I could tell, "Oh, man, I probably rubbed someone the wrong way. I probably did something I shouldn't have done," and I don't know if that happens a lot or if I'm really misunderstood by that. Hopefully, I still kinda give that impression, but that's really the genuine me. It's like, people come first in my life. Yeah, so hopefully that's not misunderstood.
That's a good way to live, and it sounds nice. It's almost like a great way to sort of wrap up this conversation because that's been my experience with you. Like, and then a couple of times we got to engage at podcast conferences. I always go in there just looking to see, and I think it was who's there, who's doing something new, and I think it was probably when you had the booth, the PodInbox booth, that we first started to get to chatting, and it's always exciting to see startups and being an entrepreneur myself, like what people are doing and how people are thinking about solving some of the problems. And so when someone comes at it from a unique perspective, it's always catches my eye. And the interactions we've had with, we've hung out with the Squadcast team as well. And just like you've got to meet, some of the community that's been there for years. And I've been, like I said, been podcasting for 10 years. And so you see people come and go, but you can always tell, where people's heart is at. And I think all the interactions I've had with you have been positive, and I always have, nice to see you and run into you. And I just am grateful for this opportunity to kind of deep dive and just get to learn a little bit more about you because you want to do it at a conference, and as those days go by super quick. They're super loud and super noisy, and so just to be able to just kind of like settle down and with our good mics and just have a kind of heart to heart for an hour is really what lights me up.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I love this conversation too, and I totally agree with what you say. Whenever I see people that I already know at conferences, I'm always like, I'm not avoiding them. I'm really just thinking, "Oh, I don't wanna monopolize their time." They already kinda know me. We could kinda, talk outside of it, and yeah, hopefully that's not misunderstood too. Yeah, so I'm glad, we got this chance.
Yeah, they see you walk by, they're like, "Oh, Pat's too cool for school now." Like, I want to say hi.
Yeah, and I'm just kinda, like, going to get some coffee.
I think you have to pick, like, you have to pick and choose. I was like, we ran into each other briefly, and then we kinda saw each other at the airport too, and I was like, "Oh, man, we gotta, like, just kinda, like, slow down and have this chat," because, like, you kinda gotta pick, like, 2 or 3 people, like, or a group of folks that you wanna kinda connect with and just deep dive, this idea of going, deep, with a a few people as opposed to like broad and just shallow with a bunch of people. So it's always been something I've been struggling with and trying to be more intentional about. What's next for you and any upcoming conferences?
I think, I'm looking at Chicago. I think that
That's evolutions.
evolutions, yeah, yeah.
Evo. I'm thinking evolutions because of Evo now. You just said Evo. So that's evolutions. Yeah, I guess.
So, like that's funny. Yeah, I miss him, by the way. Hopefully he shows up to one of these.
What about Podfest? Yeah.
I'm not sure. I like this thing that they're doing that they're going around different cities. So when they come to the city, yeah, I think, I'm located in Portland, West Coast, so it's tough. Even Evolutions and even, Podcast Movement. Do you go to all of them or
No, I mean I have to pick and choose nowadays because now I've got indoor farming conferences to go to as well.
Right, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm slowly beginning to realize it's like there's a limited sort of resources, time for these things, and energy, quite honestly, like you said. When I saw you at the airport, quite honestly, I was like, "Oh, I got so excited to see you." I was like, "Oh, let me finally go catch up." And then when I saw that you kinda had your head slunk down and then you were with your partner, and it's like, "Oh, you know what?
The wind down has started.
This is not the right time." This is not
And I knew that too, as I was like, "Oh, I wanted to acknowledge I saw you," and I was like, "Let's." So that's why I was like, "Okay, this is a much better way to catch up." So my energy's a little better.
that said yeah, yeah, for sure, and yeah, so I think I'm trying to pick and choose. I think Evolutions, yeah, probably the next one, and maybe Podcast Movement. I don't even know where I think Dallas.
Yeah, I think they're going back to Dallas where they started, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, so those are just close enough where it's not on the opposite side of the country.
So where's the best place for folks to go? It's fanlist.com,
Yep, fanlist.com, like you said, it's free. That's kinda how we get people to check it out, and yeah.
and then, anywhere else you wanna send folks to engage with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna engage with me, I'm really only active barely active on LinkedIn, but if you wanna see, all the other places, all my other links and stuff, you go to patcheung.com, I think.
We'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. I think you gave those as well. Thanks so much, Pat. Love hearing your journey, your entrepreneurial journey. It's very inspiring for folks who might be in the same boat. And it's been interesting to kind of see your journey with PodInbox and now Fanlist. I think it's a valuable tool for podcasters, and I hope we'll get some folks intrigued to learn more about it. So we'll make sure all the links are available in the show notes.
Cool, appreciate it, Harry.
Really enjoyed our time together.
Yeah, me too.